The night was colder than I expected when I pulled out of the diner parking lot just after midnight. I'd been visiting my sister up in upstate New York in a tiny town called Millbrook, and now I was making the drive back home to the outskirts of Albany. It was a road I'd taken dozens of times before, mostly during the day, but at night it felt completely different. The stretch of Route 22 that runs through the Catskill foothills is one of those places where the trees crowd the asphalt so tightly that the moonlight barely touches the pavement. My car's headlights cut through the inky blackness, reflecting off damp leaves still clinging stubbornly to the branches despite the chill of late October. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp earth. The radio was playing softly, classic rock from a local station, but even that felt swallowed by the vast silence that had settled over the road. About 20 miles in, just past the tiny crossroads of Redfield, I noticed something standing at the edge of the shoulder. It looked like a person, though I couldn't tell much more. They were tall, slender, wearing a long, dark coat with the collar pulled up. For a second, I thought maybe someone was waiting for a ride. I slowed the car, lowering my window to call out, "Hey, do you need some help?" No answer. I glanced over, and in the dim glow of my headlights, their face was impossible to see, hidden beneath a shadowy hood. I called again, but they didn't move. A knot formed in my stomach. I kept driving, steadily picking up speed, but in the side mirror, I thought I saw the figure step back into the woods. Or maybe it was just the fog swirling between the trees, thickening by the minute. The next stretch of the road was a series of sharp curves that wind through a densely wooded section. The fog was almost blinding now, like a wall of white mist that swallowed everything ahead of me. Suddenly, the car jolted. The tires hit something on the road. I slammed on the brakes and looked back. There was nothing there. My pulse quickened as I looked down at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was dipping faster than I'd expected. I'd barely made it halfway, and I'd been sure I had enough gas for the whole trip. I sighed and scanned the road ahead. The fog was so thick I could barely see the guardrails on either side. I flicked on the high beams for a moment, but they only made the fog glow brighter, reflecting back at me like a sheet of white. The radio crackled, then fell silent. I fumbled for the dial. Static. Then a whisper, barely audible, cut through the white noise. It sounded like someone calling my name. I snapped my head around. Nothing. I swallowed hard, eyes darting over the shoulder of the road. The trees seemed closer, darker, as if they were closing in. I pushed the accelerator, eager to get through this patch. A few miles down, the road straightened, and I could see the flicker of orange lights ahead, the small town of Millersfield. Relief swept through me. I pulled off at the gas station on the edge of town and parked under the flickering, fluorescent bulbs. Inside, the cashier was a young woman with tired eyes who barely looked up when I came in. I filled the tank and grabbed a coffee. I told her about the figure I'd seen on the road. She nodded knowingly. "That stretch gets weird at night," she said quietly. "Lots of folks say they've seen things out there, figures standing in the fog, cars stalling for no reason." I laughed nervously. "Like ghosts?" I asked. She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the woods messing with your head." I thanked her and stepped back into the cold night. The fog was still thick as I got back into the car. I checked the clock, 1:45 a.m., and started driving again. The last leg of the trip was mostly quiet. The fog thinned and the road opened up. I was almost home. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw headlights. Far behind me at first, but steadily gaining. I frowned and glanced in my side mirror. No other cars on the road. The headlights got closer. Closer. Then suddenly, the lights flashed high beams directly into my mirror, blinding me. I swerved, heart pounding. The car behind me followed, matching every move. My hands gripped the wheel tight as I tried to shake it. No luck. I took the next exit, hoping to lose whoever it was in the maze of side roads, but the headlights followed, relentless. I pulled onto a gravel road, headlights shining in my rear view. I floored it. The tires threw gravel everywhere. The car behind did the same. I was trapped. The gravel road ended at an old, rusted gate. I slammed on the brakes and turned off the engine. The headlights rolled past, stopped just beyond the gate. I held my breath, waiting. Then headlights disappeared into the dark. I sat in the silence, heart hammering. Eventually, I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I backed up, then turned around and drove back to the highway. I didn't stop again until I was home. The next day, I called the local sheriff's office to ask about the strange stretch of road. They told me about a man who had disappeared years ago near Millersfield. He was driving late at night in a heavy fog. His car was found abandoned. He was never seen again. Some locals say his spirit still haunts those woods. That night on the road, I'd almost become part of the story. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick, I swear I still see headlights far behind me, chasing through the dark. Story the end. The old pickup rumbled beneath Mark's hands as he cruised down Route 66. The asphalt a dark ribbon stretching endlessly beneath a sky smeared with thick clouds. It was past midnight, and the moon was nowhere to be seen. The small town he'd left hours ago had shrunk behind him into a smattering of dim lights, swallowed fast by the open desert. He'd been driving since sundown, making the trip from Albuquerque back to his home near Tulsa. The radio was tuned to a classic rock station, but the signal was patchy at best. Mostly, it was static and snippets of songs breaking through every few miles. Mark liked the quiet more, actually. It helped him think, helped him keep the loneliness at bay. The night was cool, the desert air carrying a faint scent of sagebrush and dust. The highway stretched ahead, straight and flat, the yellow lines glowing faintly in his headlights. Not a car in sight. He'd passed a rest stop about 20 miles back, but figured he could make it to the next town for gas. His tank was low, the needle hovering on empty. He made a mental note to fill up soon. The truck's old engine coughed occasionally, a reminder that it wasn't quite as reliable as it used to be, but it had never left him stranded before. As Mark rounded a slight curve, his headlights caught something on the shoulder, a figure standing alone by the edge of the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but as he slowed, uncertainty crept in. The person was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up, and their stance was unnervingly still. Mark hesitated. There was no reason to stop here. The area was notorious for travelers getting robbed or worse. But the figure didn't move or signal, just stood facing the road, almost like they were waiting for something. He slowed to a crawl, rolled down the window. "Hey," Mark called, voice echoing in the quiet desert. "You need a ride?" No response. He squinted, trying to get a better look in the beam of his headlights. The figure's head slowly turned toward him, and Mark caught a glimpse of pale skin, almost too pale against the night. The eyes were dark, so dark they seemed to swallow the light. The hairs on the back of Mark's neck stood up. He shook his head. "You all right, man? You look like you're in trouble." Still no response. The figure took a step forward, slow, deliberate. Mark's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Something about the way they moved felt wrong, unnatural, like they weren't quite human. Mark's stomach twisted. He glanced at the gas gauge again. Empty. The nearest gas station was still miles away. He was about to speed up and leave when the figure raised a hand, pointing down the road. Mark followed the gesture, trying to see what they were indicating. At first, nothing but the endless black road. Then, far off in the distance, headlights appeared, a car coming fast. Mark's chest tightened. The figure's lips parted, and a voice like a whisper broke the silence. "Don't look back." Mark frowned, confused. "What?" he asked. But the figure had already turned away, disappearing into the dark shadows of the desert. Mark blinked, startled. He turned his eyes back to the road. The headlights were closer now, blinding in the rearview mirror. The car behind him was speeding, closing in fast. Mark's pulse spiked. He pressed his foot down harder, the truck lurching forward. The taillights behind him pulsed like red eyes. His heart pounded as he pushed the truck faster, the engine roaring. But no matter how fast he went, the car stayed right behind him, matching his every move. He tried to turn off the highway, but the car followed, headlights cutting through the night like twin daggers. Mark's breath came in sharp gasps. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the windshield, a sharp spiderweb fracture that spread quickly. He slammed on the brakes. The car behind him screeched, stopping inches from the back bumper. Mark's door was wrenched open by a pair of cold, bony hands. He twisted, trying to fight, but the hands dragged him out into the night. The last thing he saw was the driver, pale as death, eyes hollow and black, a smile stretched too wide across a gaunt face. Mark screamed, but the desert swallowed his cries. Hours later, the pickup sat abandoned by the roadside, headlights still glowing faintly. No one ever found Mark. Story, the end. The highway stretched before me like a ribbon of shadowed gray, cutting through endless darkness. It was nearing 2 a.m., and I was 3 hours into a solo drive from rural Virginia back to my apartment in Richmond. The night was thick with humidity, the kind that made the air feel heavy, almost suffocating. My old sedan hummed steadily beneath me, its headlights the only beacons piercing the blackness ahead. I was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that settles after a long weekend away. Family visits, old friends, and too many memories. I'd promised myself I'd be home by midnight, but delays and wrong turns had stretched the trip far later than intended. Still, the highway was mostly empty, and I preferred it that way. After a while, the road narrowed, trees drawing close like silent sentinels, their branches casting tangled shadows over the asphalt. The radio had long since given up on signals, leaving me with static hums and the occasional snippet of a song, like distant voices in the dark. I caught a glimpse of something flickering just off the side of the road. A figure, motionless, standing in the shoulder's gravel. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something about the stillness pulled me in. The figure was thin, draped in what looked like a long coat, but the poor light made details impossible. I slowed my car, debating whether to stop. I'd seen enough late-night horror stories to know the risks. Still, a voice in me whispered to help. I rolled the window down and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The figure shifted slightly, and in the dim beam of my headlights, I thought I saw something unnatural about their posture, too stiff, like a marionette frozen mid-step. My skin prickled. I slowed to a stop just past them and flicked my hazard lights on. The gravel crunched as I stepped out, flashlight in hand from the glove box. The sudden chill in the air cut through the sticky humidity like a knife. "Hey," I called again, shining the light toward the figure. The beam caught their face, pale, too pale. And the eyes, black, entirely black, reflected back at me like dark voids. My breath hitched. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The figure smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach those soulless eyes. "Can you help me?" The voice was soft, echoing strangely. Who are you?" I managed to ask. The figure tilted their head like a curious animal, lips parting again. "They're coming." Before I could react, the flashlight flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The sudden absence of light was suffocating. My hands fumbled blindly for the car keys still in my pocket. A distant sound, like footsteps crunching over dead leaves, came from the forest beyond the roadside. Panic surged. I threw myself back into the car, slamming the door and locking it. The engine roared to life. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just black trees swaying softly in the wind. I pressed the gas and peeled away, headlights cutting through the night. But in the corner of my vision, I thought I saw a pale hand waving goodbye from the roadside. I kept driving. The road twisted and turned, miles of silence broken only by the hum of tires. But the feeling of being watched lingered. The radio sputtered to life suddenly, the words barely audible over static. "Don't stop, don't look back." I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. The night had just begun. Story, the end. The rain drummed steadily on the roof of the old Chevy as Dan drove down the deserted highway. The night was thick with fog, a low-hanging mist that blurred the edges of the trees lining both sides of the road. It was well past midnight, and Dan had been on the road for nearly 4 hours, making his way home from a business trip in the Midwest. The interstate was empty, save for the occasional flicker of distant headlights far behind him. Dan's eyes were heavy, fighting to stay open as the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers provided a hypnotic soundtrack. He reached over and switched the radio on, but all he got was static and faint, distorted voices. He sighed and turned it off. The quiet was better, even if the silence made the darkness feel heavier. He glanced at the gas gauge. It was dangerously close to empty. There was supposed to be a rest stop coming up in about 5 miles, and he hoped it was still open. The last thing he wanted was to be stranded out here with nothing but the fog and his tired thoughts. As the headlights pierced the thick fog, Dan spotted something on the side of the road, a figure standing just off the shoulder, barely visible through the mist. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but the figure didn't move or wave. Instead, it stood perfectly still, facing away from the road, head bowed slightly. Dan's stomach tightened. He slowed the truck, debating whether to stop. Part of him urged caution. He'd heard too many stories about late-night hitchhikers and trouble on lonely highways. But another part, the part that still believed in helping strangers, told him to pull over. He eased the Chevy to the shoulder, flicked on the hazard lights, and reached for his flashlight in the glove compartment. The moment he stepped out, the cold night air hit him, damp and heavy with the scent of wet pine and earth. The fog clung to the trees, making them look like ghostly sentinels watching silently. Dan aimed the flashlight at the figure. It was a woman, slender and pale, wearing a long coat that looked soaked through. Her dark hair clung to her face, obscuring her features. He called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. She didn't even turn toward him. Dan took a cautious step closer. "Ma'am?" She slowly raised her head, and Dan's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were completely black. Not just dark, but entirely void of color or reflection, like empty pits. A slow, eerie smile spread across her face. "Can you help me?" she whispered, her voice hollow and distant. Dan took a step back, heart pounding. I think you need to get help too." Suddenly, the woman tilted her head, an unnatural motion, and the smile faded. "They're coming." Before Dan could react, a chill swept through the air and the fog thickened around him, muffling the sounds of the highway. He fumbled for his keys and sprinted back to the Chevy, slamming the door shut behind him. The engine roared to life, and Dan peeled away, the figure disappearing into the fog as quickly as it had appeared. As he sped down the highway, the radio crackled to life, faint voices whispering, "Don't stop, don't look back." Dan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The night felt alive, watching, waiting, and he knew this drive was far from over. Story the end. The night was heavy, thick with silence that seemed to swallow the small 2-lane highway whole. I had been driving for hours, making my way back home from a late-night shift in a small town deep in Arkansas. The clock on the dashboard read 2:13 a.m., and the only sounds inside my car were the hum of the engine and the rhythmic tick of the windshield wipers against the light drizzle falling steadily. The stretch of road I was on was known locally as Devil's Bend, a winding, narrow path threading through dense woods and isolated farmland. During the day, it was quiet but manageable. At night, with no streetlights and nothing but the glow of the moon peeking through the canopy, it felt like something out of a nightmare. I kept the headlights on high beam as much as I could, though the rain dulled their reach. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, a tunnel framed by skeletal branches. Every mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. About halfway through the drive, I noticed a figure standing on the side of the road, just where a sharp curve narrowed dangerously. At first, I thought it was a hunter or maybe someone who had pulled over, but as I drew closer, I saw it was a man, tall, thin, dressed in an old, soaked trench coat that hung off him like a shroud. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes seemed hollow, reflecting the headlights like a ghost. I slowed, gripping the steering wheel tighter, but the man didn't move, didn't even blink. I tried to look away but couldn't. The headlights illuminated his face briefly before I passed. He just stood there, unmoving. A cold chill ran down my spine as I accelerated, the sound of my tires on wet asphalt ringing loud in the silence. I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment I thought I saw him move, stepping into the road, but then he vanished into the darkness of the trees. Trying to shake the feeling, I switched the radio on. A crackling, static-filled country station greeted me, but the music was warped and slow, as if the broadcast were distorted. Suddenly, a voice whispered through the speakers, barely audible, "Turn back, don't go on." I flicked through the stations, but every channel was either dead static or that same faint, eerie voice, repeating the warning. The radio sputtered and died, plunging me back into silence. The rain intensified, tapping hard against the windshield. Up ahead, my headlights caught a flash of red. A tail light. Another vehicle was in front of me, crawling along the road. I pressed the gas pedal, closing the distance until I saw the pickup truck's driver through the back window, a man with a grim expression, watching the road intently. I attempted to overtake, but the truck sped up, matching my every move, blocking my path. Then the driver flashed his high beams in rapid succession, blinding me. I slowed down again, heart racing. Panic started to rise as I realized the truck was deliberately keeping pace, almost like it was stalking me. I looked for an exit, but the road was lined by thick trees and steep embankments. No escape. Then I saw it, a narrow gravel side road disappearing into the woods on the right. Desperation drove me to turn onto it. The side road was uneven and slippery. Branches scraped the sides of the car as I sped along, the pickup nowhere in sight. After a mile or so, the gravel path ended at an old abandoned farmhouse. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. Broken windows, faded paint, overgrown weeds. A faint light flickered inside, but I could see no source. My heart pounded as I sat in the car, doors locked, eyes darting around the darkness. Then, tapping. Light, deliberate tapping on the driver's window. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. Outside, pressed against the glass, was a pale, thin hand. The fingers were long and unnaturally jointed. No face, just the hand. I slammed the lock button and slammed the car into reverse, gravel flying. The tapping stopped. I sped back onto the main road, headlights cutting through the rain. The pickup truck was waiting, its lights off, sitting silently on the shoulder. I floored it and raced past, the truck's engine roaring behind me. For the next 10 miles, I drove as fast as I dared, rain blurring the edges of the road. When I finally reached a town with streetlights and people, the nightmare eased, but the feeling lingered. Days later, I asked locals about that stretch. They told me the stories, about the ghost of a man who died on Devil's Bend years ago, about a phantom truck that chases drivers, and about the abandoned farmhouse that holds something dark. I never took that road at night again. But sometimes, when the rain starts to fall and the wind howls through the trees, I swear I still hear the tapping on my window. Story the end. It was just past midnight when Kyle merged onto Highway 63, the 2-lane ribbon of asphalt slicing through the dense forests of Western Virginia. The dashboard clock glowed 12:14 a.m., its green digits steady and unyielding in the dark cabin of his old Toyota Tacoma. He'd left his buddy's bachelor party in Roanoke an hour ago, opting to make the 3-hour drive back to his apartment in Lynchburg, alone, despite the warnings about driving that late on these rural roads. The sky was a vast black canvas, punctuated only by scattered stars and the faint glow of a waning moon hidden behind a veil of clouds. The air was cool but thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, as the recent rain had soaked the soil but not yet fully dissipated. Kyle's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as he settled into the rhythm of the road, the tires humming softly on the worn pavement. He liked night driving, the solitude and stillness, the way the world shrank down to just him and the stretch of road ahead. It was a time to think, to process, to unwind. But tonight felt different. The first hint came when his headlights briefly caught a flicker of movement along the right shoulder. Something dark, hunched over, disappearing behind a tree as fast as he blinked. He frowned and slowed down slightly, scanning the roadside with sharp eyes, nothing but shadows. Shrugging it off, he reached for the radio. Static. He fiddled with the dial, but the stations were all dead, swallowed by the thick woods. He clicked it off. A few miles ahead, the road curved sharply to the left. Kyle's headlights caught a figure standing at the edge of the forest. A man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a long coat, face hidden beneath a hat pulled low. The man stood unnaturally still, almost statuesque. Kyle's heart skipped. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The truck fishtailed slightly, but he managed to stop a few feet short of the figure. He stared, breath caught in his throat. The man did not move, did not blink. Then, as Kyle's eyes adjusted, the figure was gone. He released the breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his pulse pounding. "Must be a trick," he muttered. He checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Plenty to get home. He pressed the accelerator and eased back onto the highway. The truck's headlights illuminated the slick road ahead. He felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, prickling along his skin. Minutes later, he saw headlights in the distance, flickering like a ghost's lantern, far behind him. He checked the rearview mirror. No vehicle. He blinked, and the lights were gone. Kyle's grip tightened on the wheel. Up ahead, a dim light flickered between the trees. A small roadside diner. He pulled in, grateful for the break. The diner was empty except for an elderly man behind the counter. His eyes were sharp, his smile thin and knowing. Kyle ordered coffee and asked about the roads ahead. The man shrugged. "Not many folks drive out this late. Roads here, they get lonely. Watch yourself." Kyle smiled weakly, gulping the hot coffee. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, making them whisper. He glanced up just in time to see a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot. A woman, pale, her hair tangled, wearing a white dress that caught the light unnaturally. She turned and vanished into the woods. Kyle shivered. He paid and left quickly. Back on the road, the radio crackled alive, then silence. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Don't look back. Kyle's blood ran cold. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Two pairs of glowing eyes stared back at him. The night had come alive. He pressed harder on the accelerator. But the road was endless, and the darkness never let him go. Story the end. The road stretched out like a ribbon of darkness beneath the pale moonlight, barely touched by the dull glow of the occasional flickering street lamp. I had left the city hours ago, driving away from the suffocating buzz of downtown Chicago, headed out towards the quieter rural edges of Illinois, where the cornfields and empty highways promised a peaceful night. At least, that's what I thought. It was past midnight when I turned off Interstate 55 onto a smaller two-lane road that would lead me through the farmland towards my parents' house in a town called Sterling. The air was crisp and cool, the kind of late October chill that prickled through the thin fabric of my jacket despite the car's heater running on full blast. I had been on the road for nearly an hour, the only light from my car's headlights piercing through the inky blackness. The radio was playing a low-volume classic rock station, a few static crackles breaking the quiet, but otherwise steady and familiar. I was alone, except for the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of tires rolling over cracked asphalt. As I drove, the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, swallowing the road's edges. The fields on either side were shrouded in mist that had slowly begun to rise from the damp earth after a recent rain. Trees stood like silent sentinels at the edges of the fields, their leafless branches scraping the night sky. I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, feeling the kind of unease that comes from being somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, where reality feels just slightly off. Up ahead, a dim orange glow caught my eye near a bend in the road. At first, I thought it was the lights of a farmstead or a distant house. But as I got closer, I realized it was something else, a solitary figure standing at the side of the road, illuminated faintly by the streetlight's flickering glow. The figure was a man, or at least appeared so. He was wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low over his face. He stood perfectly still, facing the road, hands by his sides, unmoving. I slowed the car instinctively, curiosity mingled with unease. I cracked my window slightly and called out, "Hey, you need a ride or anything?" No answer. I glanced at him again, but he remained silent, his face hidden in shadow. A sudden gust of cold wind blew through the open window, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and something else. Something metallic, like rusted iron. I hesitated. The man didn't move, didn't wave, didn't make a sound. I was about to drive on when I noticed something that sent a chill through me. The man's feet were not touching the ground. He was hovering just inches above the pavement. My heart slammed in my chest. I slammed the window shut, accelerated, and didn't look back. The radio crackled violently, then cut out entirely. The car's headlights flickered twice and then went completely dark. I was plunged into near pitch blackness. For a moment, I thought the engine had died, but it kept running. I fumbled for the controls, toggling the headlight switch. Nothing. Panic crept in. I slowed the car, pulling over to the shoulder. The fog seemed to thicken around me, swirling in from the fields like living smoke. Then came the sound, soft at first, like the distant tapping of footsteps. Closer. Closer. I looked around, heart hammering. The fog parted briefly, revealing the figure again, still hovering, motionless, watching me. The tapping grew louder, now sounding against the roof of the car. 3 distinct knocks. I jumped and slammed my door lock. I sat frozen, trying to will my breath to steady. After a moment, the taps stopped. The fog rolled back in. The radio suddenly burst to life with static and faint whispers I couldn't make out. I tore the ignition key out, cutting the engine. Silence. I sat for several long minutes before finally daring to turn the key again. The headlights flickered on. The radio was silent. I peeled away from the shoulder, heart still racing. For the rest of the drive home, I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see that hovering figure. I never did. But every time I drive that road at night, I feel that same cold breath on my neck, and I hear those three knocks echoing in the silence. Story the end. The sky had been an unbroken sheet of dark gray all evening, the thick clouds blocking out the stars and moon. Mike was almost halfway home after his shift at the factory, a long haul from the industrial outskirts of Cleveland to his small apartment near the edge of town. The highway was nearly deserted, just the faint pulse of his headlights and the distant wail of an occasional train breaking the night's silence. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other tapping rhythmically to the soft country station playing low in the background. His mind wandered, drifting between thoughts of what awaited him at home and the humdrum grind of everyday life. The road was familiar, but stretched on endlessly, flanked by dense woods that looked like black walls against the dim glow of his headlights. It was around 1:15 a.m. when the truck in front of him suddenly braked hard, its red taillights glowing sharply against the night. Mike slammed on his brakes, barely managing to avoid rear-ending the vehicle. He cursed under his breath and slowed to a cautious pace. Ahead, the truck pulled off to the shoulder and stopped. Mike's headlights caught the shape of a man stepping out, silhouetted against the dim glow of a lone streetlight on the shoulder. The man stood motionless, facing the trees. Curious, Mike pulled over a few yards behind. He grabbed his phone. There was barely any signal, but maybe enough to call 911 if something was wrong. The man didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there like a statue. "Hey, you okay?" Mike called out through the closed window. No answer. Mike stepped out, the cold night air biting through his jacket. He moved toward the man, who remained still, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. "Sir?" Suddenly the man's head snapped toward Mike. His eyes were black pits, empty and hollow, reflecting no light. Mike stumbled back, heart pounding. "Jesus," he whispered. The man opened his mouth, but no sound came. Instead, an eerie chill flooded the air. Mike rushed back to his truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. As he pulled back onto the road, the man disappeared into the shadows. Mike glanced in the rearview mirror. Behind him, a pair of headlights appeared out of nowhere, fast approaching. He floored the accelerator, but the headlights stayed on his tail. The truck's radio burst into static, the dial spinning wildly. Mike's phone died. He tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong enough that it set his instincts screaming. Ahead, the road curved sharply, lined by thick trees. The headlights behind flickered, then disappeared. Mike slowed, breathing hard. A figure appeared at the edge of the road, a woman in white, drenched and trembling. Eyes locked on him. He slammed the brakes. The figure stepped into the light. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes sunken. Mike's breath caught. The truck's engine cut out. The radio whispered his name. Mike grabbed the wheel, trying to start the engine. Nothing. The woman moved closer, silent but menacing. Mike closed his eyes. When he opened them, the engine roared back to life. He sped away, heart racing. He never took that road again. Story the end. The night had settled over the winding highways of rural Pennsylvania like a heavy blanket, thick with mist and the low hum of distant thunderstorms. I was on the road alone, driving back to my apartment in Pittsburgh after visiting my sister upstate. The GPS showed I still had over 60 miles to go, and the clock said 11:30 p.m. The rain had let up, but the air was damp and cold, the smell of wet earth drifting through my open window. For hours, the only signs of life were the occasional flicker of headlights passing in the opposite lane or the dim glow of farmhouse windows nestled deep in the valleys. The road was narrow, lined with towering pines that pressed in close, blotting out the sky. My headlights cut through the foggy blackness, illuminating the slick pavement and the occasional deer crossing sign. I'd been driving for over 4 hours straight. My eyelids felt heavy, and the hum of the engine was hypnotic. I pulled over at a rest stop, a small clearing surrounded by trees with a solitary, flickering street lamp. I got out, stretched, and breathed the cool air deeply, hoping it would help me stay alert. Back in the car, I noticed my gas gauge dangerously close to empty. No stations in sight for miles. The GPS said the next town, a tiny place called Hollow Creek, was about 10 miles ahead. I decided to risk it and keep going. The road twisted sharply up a steep hill, the trees on either side seeming to close in tighter. Suddenly, my headlights picked up a figure standing just beyond the tree line. A man, tall and thin, wearing a dark raincoat, his face obscured by the hood. I slowed down instinctively. The man raised his hand as if signaling me to stop. I wasn't sure if he was asking for help or warning me to keep going. I rolled the window down slightly. "Are you okay?" No response. He stepped forward, into the beam of my headlights. His face was pale and gaunt, eyes sunken and staring, lips pressed tight. An unsettling chill ran down my spine. "Do you need help?" I asked again. The man's mouth twitched into something like a smile, but his eyes stayed cold. Then, just as quickly, he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I locked the window, my heart pounding. Something about him wasn't right. I drove on, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. For the first time that night, I saw headlights behind me, bright, white, and relentless. The car was close, almost tailgating, but I didn't recognize the make or model. No taillights, just headlights. I flipped my brights on and off, hoping the driver would dim their lights. No reaction. Panic rising, I took the next exit, a narrow dirt road winding deeper into the woods. The other car followed. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. A text message from an unknown number. "Turn back." I swallowed hard and typed a quick reply. "Who is this?" No response. The headlights kept coming. I pressed the accelerator, tires spinning on the wet gravel. The road twisted sharply, and I could see the car gaining on me. My hands trembled on the wheel. Then the car's headlights vanished. I slowed, heart pounding. I stopped, checked my mirrors, empty. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. The radio crackled, static filling the cabin. A voice whispered, barely audible, "Don't stop. Don't look back." The words echoed in my mind. I started driving again, eyes fixed on the road ahead. At the next town, lights and people welcomed me back to safety. But the feeling never left. Sometimes when the night is darkest and the radio static crackles, I swear I hear that whisper. And I remember the man in the raincoat standing in the shadows, waiting. Story, the end. The highway stretched out endlessly beneath the dull glow of my headlights, the rain falling in a steady drizzle that blurred the edges of the road. It was late, well past midnight, and the air was thick with that damp, chilly heaviness that only a late autumn night can bring. I'd been driving for hours, making the long trip from Indianapolis to a small town in eastern Kentucky where my aunt lived. The trip was supposed to be simple. Just me, my old sedan, and the open road. But as the miles piled up behind me, the night seemed to take on a different character, one that pressed in close and refused to let go. I'd left the highway earlier to take a shortcut through a patchwork of country roads winding through dense woods and rolling hills. The GPS on my phone was acting up. Signal was spotty, the screen flickering between blank and frozen, and I had to rely on the faded road signs that barely caught the weak halo of my headlights. Somewhere out there, the trees crowded the roadside so thickly they blocked out even the moonlight, leaving me to drive in almost complete darkness. The rain began to pick up again, heavier now, pattering against the windshield like fingers drumming a restless beat. I switched on the wipers to their highest setting, squinting through the spray, my knuckles tight on the steering wheel. The road curved sharply ahead, a narrow bridge arching over a creek whose waters swelled and churned from the storm. As I crossed, something flickered at the edge of my vision, movement in the woods. I glanced sideways but saw nothing but the blur of wet leaves and dark trunks. Still, the feeling lingered, like something was watching me. I tried to shake it off. Night drives always felt a little eerie, but this felt different, like the night was holding its breath, waiting for something. The next town on my map was Bell's Hollow, a dot on the screen that promised a gas station and maybe a diner open late. My tank was already half empty, and I was tired. The road signs told me I had 5 miles to go. The pavement beneath me suddenly felt rougher, the asphalt cracked and patched. I saw an old sign leaning at a crooked angle, "Welcome to Bell's Hollow." But the town itself was strange. No lights twinkled from homes, no glow from street lamps, just darkness. A silence so thick it pressed against my ears. I slowed, eyes darting around for any sign of life. A building appeared on the roadside, a weather-beaten gas station with a single pump under a rusted canopy. The neon sign flickered weakly, the letters buzzing, "Open." I pulled in and shut off the engine. The air was cold and damp, and as I stepped out, the rain softened to a mist. I walked toward the pump, but something made me pause. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing just beyond the edges of the parking lot. Tall, thin, hunched slightly, wearing a long dark coat that blended into the shadows. The figure didn't move or speak, just watched. I swallowed hard and looked away, trying to focus on the pump. The keypad was cracked and the screen flickered erratically. I fumbled with my wallet, pulled out a few bills, and went inside the station. Inside, the place smelled of mildew and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. Behind the counter was a man, older, with a face weathered by years of hard work and worry. His eyes were dull, almost lifeless. "Gas pump's not working," I said. "Can I pay inside?" He nodded slowly. "Cash only." I handed him the money. He counted it quietly, then reached under the counter and pulled out an old, tarnished key on a wooden fob. "Use this," he said softly. I hesitated but took the key. The man didn't say anything else, just stared at me. Outside, I unlocked the pump and began to fill the tank. The old analog meter clicked loudly with each gallon. As I worked, I kept glancing toward the edge of the parking lot, half expecting the figure to be closer. When I finished, I locked the pump and returned the key to the man inside. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Safe travels." I nodded and hurried back to my car. Just as I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of the figure again. Now standing right at the edge of the gas station's canopy, face turned toward me. I stared hard, but the figure's face was featureless, just a smooth, pale oval. A chill ran down my spine. I pulled out onto the road, heart pounding. The town behind me swallowed in darkness. Back on the highway, I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw headlights approaching fast. The car behind me was close, too close, and its high beams were on, blinding me. I flicked my brights on and off, hoping to signal it to dim its lights, but the driver made no move. Panic gripped me, and I pressed the accelerator harder, weaving slightly to create distance. The car behind followed my every move. I took the next exit ramp, a narrow gravel road leading into the woods. The other car followed. The gravel crunched under my tires as I raced down the winding path, heart pounding in my chest. The headlights behind me illuminated the dense trees on either side, making the shadows twist and dance. Suddenly, the pursuing car's lights vanished. I slowed to a stop, chest heaving, eyes scanning the darkness behind me. Nothing. No sign of the car. No sound but the rustle of leaves. I started the engine and continued down the gravel road, praying it would lead me back to the main highway. After several tense minutes, the road opened onto a small clearing, a quiet pond reflecting the moonlight breaking through the clouds. I pulled over, hands trembling. My phone buzzed. Signal. A text message appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "Don't look back." I swallowed hard, my breath fogging the window. The radio crackled, static filling the cabin. Then, through the hiss, a whisper. "Turn around." I slammed the radio off, heart pounding. I didn't look back. I drove the remaining miles home in silence, the night's shadows closing in tight. But sometimes, when the rain taps against my window, I hear whispers carried on the wind, and I remember the figure at the gas station, the faceless man waiting in the dark. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I hit the road, leaving my buddy's place in rural Missouri behind. The sky was clear but cold, November's early bite already creeping in. I had about 2 hours ahead of me, winding through back roads and small towns, the kind of night drive that's usually peaceful, almost meditative, the kind of drive you take to clear your head. My name's Jake, and I'm no stranger to late-night drives, especially this stretch of highway. I know every curve, every faded mile marker. But this night felt different from the start, like the road was holding its breath, waiting for something. I was cruising along Highway 63, the radio playing a soft classic rock station at low volume. The headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the empty road and the thick woods that lined both sides. Somewhere up ahead, the lights of the next town flickered faintly, a promise of warmth and life. That's when I saw it, a figure standing right on the edge of the road. I slowed down, my heart tightening. The figure was a man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a heavy coat and jeans, standing still with his back to me. At first, I thought maybe he was waiting for a ride, but then I saw his posture. It was stiff, unnatural. As I passed, I glanced sideways. His head was turned slightly, but his face was hidden by shadows. I swallowed hard and sped up, telling myself it was nothing. Just a guy out late, maybe trying to flag someone down. But as I rounded the bend, I caught a glimpse of another car behind me in the mirror. The headlights were bright, too close for comfort. I wasn't speeding, but whoever was behind me had turned on their high beams and was riding my tail. I tapped the brakes lightly, signaling that I was slowing. The car behind me did the same, matching my every move. That's when I realized I wasn't going to shake this driver. I took the next exit, a small gas station lit by flickering neon, hoping to lose whoever was following me. I pulled into the lot and parked near the pumps. The other car pulled in behind me, the engine cutting off. I stayed in the truck, heart pounding. The other vehicle's headlights stayed on, blinding me through the windshield. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the passenger door of the other car. It was the same man I'd seen on the side of the road, only now he was coming toward me. I locked the doors, grabbed my phone, and tried to call 911. No signal. The man stopped a few feet from my window and smiled. Not a friendly smile. A cold, dead smile that didn't reach his eyes. He tapped on the glass with a knuckle. I shook my head, starting the truck. He backed away as I pulled out of the lot. The car followed, lights off this time, silent as a shadow. I floored the gas, weaving through back roads, but the silence behind me was louder than any engine. I finally reached a highway with more traffic, the man's car disappearing in the flow of other vehicles. I sighed in relief, glancing at my phone. Still no signal. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Days later, when the police finally returned my calls, I learned that the stretch of highway I'd traveled had been the site of a series of disappearances over the past decade. Most victims were last seen hitchhiking alone at night. No one ever found their bodies. I've never picked up a stranger on the road again. Story. The end. The night had settled like a thick blanket over the endless stretch of highway running through the backwoods of West Virginia. Rain had been falling off and on since dusk, turning the asphalt slick and gleaming under my truck's headlights. I had left the small factory town hours ago, the weight of a 12-hour shift pressing on my shoulders, and now the only company on this desolate road was the low drone of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers cutting through the fog. I had taken this route dozens of times. Highway 219, a narrow ribbon weaving through endless forests and forgotten hills. At night, it was always eerie, but I never minded it too much. The solitude gave me time to think, to clear my mind. Tonight, though, that solitude felt different, like the darkness was waiting, watching. I was almost halfway home when I saw her standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought maybe someone had broken down. The woman was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her pale face, clothes clinging to her frame. She wasn't waving or signaling for help, just standing perfectly still, staring out into the road, eyes fixed on the horizon. I slowed the truck instinctively, the wheels crunching on the gravel shoulder as I pulled over a few feet ahead of her. She didn't move. My headlights cast long shadows behind her, flickering in the intermittent lightning that split the night sky. "Hey," I called out, voice louder than I expected. "You okay?" No response, just silence. I rolled down the window, the cold rain biting at my skin. "Do you need a ride? You're soaked." Still nothing. She tilted her head slowly, unnaturally, and that's when I noticed her eyes. They were black. Pupil and iris completely dark, like empty holes staring into nothing. I slammed the window shut and locked the doors, heart pounding. I hit the gas, tires spinning slightly on the wet gravel as I pulled back onto the highway. My hands shook on the wheel. I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still there, standing at the edge of the trees, motionless. But then something moved behind her, another shadow, darker and less defined. I blinked, and they both vanished. The road ahead was just trees and fog. I pushed the truck faster, trying to outrun the feeling that something was following me. I had just turned onto a narrow, winding section of road when the headlights appeared behind me, a pair of bright, yellowish beams that closed the distance too quickly to be coincidence. The taillights were right behind me now, bouncing over the slick pavement. I accelerated, but the vehicle matched my speed, riding my tail like it wanted me to know it was there. I tried braking gently, signaling to let it pass. No response. The radio was dead static, no signal at all on this stretch of road. I fiddled with the dial until it clicked off. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter as I watched the headlights in the mirror grow brighter. The sky cracked again with lightning, and for a split second I saw the shape of the vehicle, a rusty old pickup, beat up and grimy. The windshield cracked. Then a voice came over the radio, distorted and crackling, so faint I thought I was imagining it at first. "Don't stop. Don't look back." I froze. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. The truck was closer now, so close I could almost make out the shape of the driver. A man, face pale and wet, with a grim smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. I slammed on the brakes, sending the truck into a skid that left fresh black tire marks across the road. The other truck fishtailed but stayed behind me. My heart hammered. I shifted into reverse, but my truck stalled. The other driver laughed, an eerie, hollow sound that echoed in the storm. I fumbled with the ignition, desperation making my hands clumsy. Finally, the engine roared back to life, and I spun the wheel, trying to get back onto the main road. The other truck roared after me. I floored the gas, rain blurring the edges of the road. Ahead, the road curved sharply, and I took it fast, tires screeching. But when I glanced in the mirror, the other truck was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The headlights blinked back on, this time at the edge of the forest where the trees formed a tunnel so dark it swallowed light. Then, in the beams, I saw them. Dozens of faces, pale and wet, their mouths frozen in silent screams. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions toward the road, reaching out with trembling hands. My breath caught. I slammed on the brakes again, but the road ahead was blocked by fallen trees and broken branches. I was trapped. The faces reached the edge of the pavement, closer and closer. I turned the wheel hard, trying to swerve around the obstruction. The headlights dimmed and flickered. When the truck behind me reappeared in the mirror, its driver raised a hand, waving slowly. I shook my head, pushing the gas pedal. The rain turned heavier, blurring the vision. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the storm ceased. The fog lifted. The road was empty. No fallen trees, no faces, no truck, just the quiet, dark road stretching ahead. My hands trembled on the wheel as I drove the last few miles home, windows rolled up tight. Sometimes, late at night when the wind rustles the trees, I swear I can still hear the tapping, soft, insistent, on the roof of my truck. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see those black eyes staring back. Story the end.